1856. All right. Now, we're going to have a new political party in this particular election. And this new party is going to take its name from Thomas Jefferson's party. So what do we have back in elections? Which party? The Republicans. Very good. So the Republicans are back in. What party faded out? The Whig Party. Very good. So this is going to be between the Democrats and Republicans. Okay? So prior to the election of 1856, another, quote, new political party was formed. This, quote, new party took its name from Thomas Jefferson's party, and the Republican Party reestablishes themselves into American politics. And because the Whig Party faded, the two major parties that would be represented in the election of 1856 would be the Democrats and Republicans. Doesn't that sound kind of familiar? Democrats and Republicans. Now, the Democratic Party nominated James Buchanan of Pennsylvania for the presidency. The Democratic Party nominated James Buchanan. Remember, the Democrats were big supporters of the Compromise of 1850. They were big supporters of the Kansas and Nebraska Act because the Democrats favored or didn't favor slavery. Favored. Okay? And James Buchanan's going to be their candidate. You remember old John C. Fremont that fought in the Mexican War? He is going to be the Republican candidate for president. John C. Fremont, who fought militarily in the Mexican War. And the campaign slogan for the Republicans in 1856 is going to be free soil, free speech, free men, and Fremont. Very good. So the Republican counter with John C. Fremont, and he's going to run under the campaign slogan of free soil, free speech, free men, and Fremont. I know it. It's open no test. If I say it and repeat it, you should have it down. Or I would say to you, normally don't write this down, just listen. No? So, Republicans countered with John C. Fremont, and they ran under the campaign slogan of free soil, free speech, free men, and Fremont. Well, this was a pretty close election, but James Buchanan wins the presidency. He gets 174 electoral votes. Fremont, 114. (174 to 14), and becomes the nation's 15th president. The famous number 16 is who? Abraham Lincoln. Okay. Now this is going to take us to an interesting subject that's very important, the Dred Scott decision. Yes, dear? Okay, now we're going to take you to something, this kind of interesting. I think you'll enjoy this. The Dred Scott decision. If I say decision, who's deciding? No. Who's deciding on a decision? No. Who's hired? Who decides matters of law? Who's the highest judicial? Supreme Court. Very good. So this will be the Dred Scott decision is going to be a Supreme Court case. And listen, you should understand this. Now listen to this carefully. On March 6th of 1857, on March 6th of 1857, the Supreme Court handed down what we know as the Dred Scott decision. On March 6th, 1857, the Supreme Court handed down what we know today as the Dred Scott decision. Anybody know what this is about? Slavery, very good. A young man by the name of Dred Scott, he was a slave who appealed all the way to the Supreme Court for his freedom. Okay? Dred Scott appealed all the way to the Supreme Court to try and get his freedom.
Mr. Baird,
Yep.
what was that date again?
March 6, 1857, the Supreme Court handed down what was known as the Dred Scott decision, and Dred Scott was a slave who had appealed all the way to the Supreme Court for his freedom. Now he has to have an argument why he should be free.
So this was a really big deal.
It was, yeah. Here's his argument. He says, I should be a free man because my owner took me from a slave state, Missouri, to a free state, Wisconsin. Is that a good argument?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a pretty good argument, right? So Scott's argument that went all the way to the Supreme Court was that he should be free because his owner had taken him from a slave state, Missouri, to a free state, Wisconsin.
Did his owner just he didn't know that it was
Oh, but this is an interesting
So the
ruling.
slave, if owner takes me to the slave, just walk off and say it's
That's what he's saying, but his slave owner's saying no. Okay, so it goes all the way to the Supreme Court. This is what the Supreme Court ruled. The residence in a free territory and or free state does not give Dred Scott his freedom. Yeah, it's not right, is it? Now you gotta hear the justification behind the ruling. The ruling was that residence in a free territory or a free state does not give the slave the right to their freedom. Does not. That was the ruling. That was the ruling.
Yeah, but if he moves there, he's not a resident of that place.
But a resident doesn't get freedom, that's what you're saying.
Why?
In a free state.
Why?
But that would
That
mean
makes no sense.
No, it doesn't, but
that it's not a free state.
no. Now listen, this is good conversation. He was a slave in a slave state of Missouri.
Yeah.
His owner took him to a free state that outlaws slavery.
Exactly. So
How could he not be free?
Because then they're both residents of
Yeah.
that state, so they're technically free.
You know why he's not a free man? Or why the Supreme Court? Now listen to this. He said that Scott didn't have the right to appeal any of these decisions to the Supreme Court. The reason, it wasn't because they thought it was, they may have thought exactly like you, Cole, but the point is the Supreme Court ruled legally that Dred Scott did not have the right to appeal.
Pretty much they just didn't want to do it.
No, he didn't have the right to appeal any of these, you know, the earlier decision at this level, and he appealed to this level, and he appealed to this level, and it finally got to the Supreme Court. They're saying he doesn't have the right to appeal any of those decisions.
Why?
Why?
Yeah, why doesn't he have that right?
Because only citizens of the United States of America have the right to appeal.
And since he was
Decisions.
bought in slavery,
It's not, well, what it says, that was never stated, Cole, but you're right there. It was never really stated, but this Supreme Court decision stated legally that blacks are not citizens of the United States. That's what it said. I don't care. I mean, I'm not arguing. They don't care. They're not citizens of the United States. Therefore, he couldn't appeal up the chain. That was historic. Listen, this is a historic Supreme Court decision. Everybody that listens to this would think he would be a free man. But they're saying he can't be a free man because we can't rule that he's free because he doesn't have the right to appeal. Do you think maybe the Supreme Court justice might have said, yeah, you're right, but I can't rule that you're right because you don't have the right to appeal, basically stating that Negro slaves were not citizens of the United States of America. That's a huge Supreme Court decision. Will that change in history? Yes. But at the time, the Dred Scott decision stated, the judge might have believed he should have been free just like you guys do. but he can't rule him free. Why? Because he doesn't have the right to appeal these decisions because he's not a citizen of the United States. Stating at that point, setting precedent, that every black slave in the country is not a citizen of the United States. Are free slaves? Or excuse me, free men? Are free men citizens? We'll hold that thought for
So
later.
then if a slave or a black man was living in a free state.
Could he vote?
Was he still a citizen then?
That's going to be determined by another amendment of the Constitution. Do blacks have the right, do women and blacks have the right to vote right now? And I'm hard to know. Because they're not citizens. And because they're not citizens, because of this ruling, Dred Scott cannot appeal to the Supreme Court and be free. It's a weird deal. That's how it went. It's a very historic decision in our country. But we'll get it straightened out later, right? All right, let's talk about our next subtopic then, which is the emergence of Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln's going to come on the scene. The emergence of Abraham Lincoln. Nobody even knows who this guy is, for the most part, right? Yeah, well, we're going to tell you about that. Now, when's he elected president? Anybody know what election? 60. I mean, in 1858, Abraham Lincoln is simply a little-known politician. Nobody even already knows who he is. 2 years later, he's going to be president of the United States. So something had to happen between 1858 and 1860. Okay? That's what we're going to tell you about. So, prior to 1858, Abraham Lincoln was nothing more than a little-known politician. People are going to start hearing about Abraham Lincoln when he runs for the Senate seat in Illinois. Any speech and debaters in here? My God, you better know this. They're looking at me. So Lincoln's publicity changes when he decides to run for Senator of Illinois. Who's he run against? Cassie. In 1858. Who's he run against for that seat? Stephen Douglas of Illinois. Look at her. Stephen Douglas of Illinois is who Lincoln's going to run against in 1858. And all of a sudden, after this election for the Senate, everybody's going to know about Abraham Lincoln. Because Abraham Lincoln's going to run against, little-known Abraham Lincoln is going to run against powerful Senator Stephen Douglas. Let me tell you a little bit about Lincoln before we get to this. Where was he born? Anybody know what state? He was born in Kentucky. He grew up very poor. He received no formal schooling as a young child. Okay, he grows up in Kentucky, very, very poor, receives no formal schooling as a young child. So he grows up poor, grows up in Kentucky, and he has no schooling, formal schooling. Now when he gets to be 21 years old, he moves from Kentucky to Illinois, and he joins the Whig Party. Gets into politics. So he grows up in Kentucky. He grows up poor. What's the story? What's the question? He receives no formal schooling. And finally, when he turns 21, he moves to Illinois, gets into politics, joining the Whig Party. Well, he decided to run for the Illinois State Legislature. Does anybody know what the Illinois State Legislature is? Who is the state legislator from Wyoming here? Anybody know a state legislator from Wyoming? One lives right here, it did.
Oh, really?
Kids went to school here, graduated. Ever heard of Mike Greer, the lawyer? He's a member of the Wyoming, what's the deal over there? He's a member of the Wyoming legislature. Okay, he's a member of the Wyoming legislature. In other words, he serves the people of Wyoming in the state legislature. That's what Lincoln did when he was in his early 20s. He ran for and was elected to the Illinois State Legislature. Well, Mike Greer is a pretty good legislator. He really is. He's got a pretty good reputation from Orland here. Now, Mike Greer, I don't know if he's going to do this, but maybe he'd get good at that and decide, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to run for the House of Representatives from Wyoming. Go to Washington. He probably could do that. I don't know if he'd win or not, but he's probably got enough pizzazz about him, he might be able to do that. Well, that's what Lincoln did. He decided after some success in the Illinois State Legislature that he would run for the House, and he won. He was elected to the House of Representatives. Well, what does everybody do when they serve in the House? What do they want to do after they serve in the House? Because that's maybe the junior position. No, not yet. They like to go to the Senate, because the Senate's a little more prestigious. So that's what Lincoln did. He served one term in the House of Representatives, and he decided, you know what, I'd like to be a senator. But the only way he's a senator is if he beats this very powerful Stephen Douglas, who we've talked about, who's running for re-election. Nobody, it's like David and Goliath. Nobody's given Lincoln much of a chance here to defeat this very prestigious Stephen Douglas. And everybody thought he was crazy for even challenging the polished Douglas for the Senate seat. Thought he was crazy. Now there's no way. Lincoln had a strategy. How did he want to get people to really know the shortcomings, in his mind, of Stephen Douglas? What did Lincoln challenge him to? No? What? Come on, you two. You guys disappoint me. What did he challenge him to? A debate. Don't you guys debate and use the Lincoln-Douglas debate style?
I'm on the speech side.
Oh, how about you? You swim. You're not even on it. I got the wrong sport.
Not the wrong Nelson.
Yeah, wrong Nelson. Well, hey, these speech and debate kids that are into the debate side, evidently, they are, aren't they, have you ever heard that? They use the Lincoln-Douglas debate style. It was invented right here. So think about this. This mismatch is going to be interesting because Douglas was known as the best person to debate you could go against. He was very polished. And people think Lincoln is just a fool for challenging Stephen Douglas to debates. Do you think Douglas accepted his challenge? Oh, without doubt. He couldn't wait. And they scheduled 7 debates from August to September of 1858. So Lincoln comes out and boldly, and some people think foolishly, challenges very polished Stephen Douglas to debates. And Douglas eagerly accepts Lincoln's challenge, and they schedule 7 different debates from August 1858 to September 1858. They're going to debate each other 7 times. Now, picture this in your mind. I don't even want you to write this down. Just picture these two standing up in debate. Here's Douglas, well-groomed and polished, stocky figure, bullish voice. Lincoln, lanky, tall, baggy clothing, unshined shoes, and a high-pitched, somewhat feminine voice. Seriously, this is what you had in this debate. I want to repeat that. Just listen. Douglas, well-groomed, polished, stocky figure, bullish voice. Lincoln, lanky, tall, baggy clothing, unshined shoes, high-pitched, feminine voice. That's what was going to get, I mean, is that a mismatch or what in most people's minds? Well, they do these 7 debates, and Douglas goes on and defeats Lincoln in the Senate race. However, it's just like I went and watched this basketball game last Sunday. Grand Canyon University, not ranked, a lot less population, a lot less money to run their basketball program, athletes technically less athletic, loses to number 5 Nevada by 6 points. They lose the game, but did they gain respect? Nobody wants to play Grand Canyon, boy, they might beat you. So these bigger teams that think they're gonna get a cakewalk win aren't interested probably in playing Grand Canyon, especially at Grand Canyon's home court, which this was. Same thing happened with Lincoln. Although he didn't win the election, he became very established in national politics. Everybody knew this guy. God, he had the courage to take on Douglas, and I don't know, you don't keep scoring debates, but that he almost beat him. My God, he didn't lose by hardly anything in that election. We thought he'd get blown out. Everybody started to pay attention to Abraham Lincoln. And this great showing against Douglas by Lincoln in 1858 is going to gain him the Republican nomination for president in 1860. If it wasn't for Stephen Douglas and these debates, there might not have been a president, Abraham Lincoln. Probably the second ranked greatest president in polls. Washington usually goes first and Lincoln goes second. We don't even have an Abraham Lincoln if he doesn't get in these debates with Stephen Douglas. So history has a way of changing things. If Lincoln gets crushed by Douglas and does a terrible job and looks like a fool, nobody even knows him. We don't ever have a president, Abraham Lincoln. But that's not what history did. He competed well. Didn't win, but showed well enough to gain popularity. Okay, that's going to take us as we get closer to Civil War, and that's going to be John Brown's, remember old John Brown from Bleeding, Kansas? John Brown's raid at Harper's Ferry, Virginia. John Brown's raid at Harper's Ferry, Virginia. Now we all remember John Brown, I hope, from the fact that he murdered 5 men that were for slavery in Lawrence, Kansas. Okay? He was an abolitionist against slavery, murdered them. All these guys that wanted slavery,
Yep.
he murdered 5 of them.